Welcome to Cuyahoga Arts and Culture's 2025 Project Support Panel. I'm Davon, and I'm here with my fellow staff, Julia, our co-chair, Laura, Maya, Jill, and Jake. For audiences joining us online, you can find the captioning by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your page. I just want to say thank you to our panelists for serving on our interactive public panel, learning about our process, applicants, and funding criteria. For Arts and Culture in Cuyahoga County, we are the public funder for arts and culture in Cuyahoga County. Our mission is to inspire and strengthen the community by investing in arts and culture. The goal of project support grant making is to promote public access and encourage the breadth of arts and cultural programming in our community by supporting Cuyahoga County-based projects. Before we begin, I do want to have a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that the land that we stand on in the place that we call Cuyahoga County is land that was claimed by the United States government through force, displacement, and treaties negotiated in bad faith. We acknowledge those of the Shawnee, Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Haudenosaunee Confederacy whose lands we stand on, and the thousands of Native Americans representing over 100 tribes who currently live in Northeast Ohio today. We thank the Lake Erie Native American Council for helping us develop this land acknowledgement. We also want to take a moment to uplift CAC's value of equity. We choose to lead with racial equity in our work because the creation and perpetuation of racial inequities is embedded in government and grant making. We confront the white supremacy that resides in our work because racial inequities across all indicators of success are deep and pervasive. We also recognize the power and potential that organizations who produce arts and cultural programming have as bearers of culture. These institutions have the power to write the narrative about who belongs and who is valued. We encourage arts organizations to connect with resources to advance equity in your own work. Please visit cacgrants.org/equity to learn more. And it's also important to note that CAC does not make grants or funding decisions based on the basis of race, color, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, disability, or any characteristic protected by law. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director, Jill Paulson, with some words for our panelists and applicants.
Thank you so much, Davon, and thank you everyone who is here today, both on our panel, and I'll get to my official thanks soon, but also those of you who are tuning in live or maybe down the road watching these as they are posted online on our website. My name is Jill. I'm the director here at Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, and on behalf of our board of trustees and our full team here of 7 people, I want to welcome our panelists to the process, and also all of you who are listening online. This is our 3rd and final day of panel review live, which is happening obviously here now via stream. I want to thank my teammates for doing a great job, and I know these next few hours will go very well. Stay tuned for when you can get the recordings later, but I know a good afternoon is ahead of us. Now, just a little bit about panel and why it connects to the work we do, right, in our values here at CAC. I think it's important to note that public panels for Cuyahoga Arts and Culture really are a way that we can live our values, right? Our values of trust and equity and stewardship. It's a way that we can put them into action and we can all take part in them, both the applicants, the panelists, and then also our team. So hopefully you see and feel that today, but know that it's really a clear way that we can make true that we are a public agency working on behalf of all the residents of Cuyahoga County. I think it's also really important to note that our panelists are all experts. Make sure you check out their bios. We're so lucky to have snagged them today. Not only are they here with us for a few hours, but they've done plenty of work in the last month leading up to today. And again, thank you all for doing what you're doing with us. You'll hear them use the same criteria that you use as applicants to fill out your application. So listen for those pieces. We want to make sure that there's a shared language and that when you're going through, and as you and now I'm speaking to the applicants, as you filled out your applications, right, you've had funding criteria. Those are the same funding criteria that our panelists use to assess. So look and listen for those cues, and hopefully you'll be able to follow the process and get a real good sense of how things are going. And I know for our panel, Devon will keep you in check and let you know if there are places where we want to get them a little bit more aligned to our funding criteria. If you want to hear more about our panel process, please go to cacgrants.org/panel. Now I'm going to just breathe here a moment and say thank you, thank you, thank you. So my 3 thank yous go to, first, the panelists. Like I said, you're doing this really wonderful service for us. It gives our work credibility. It helps us learn from you. And I think it's exciting for us to spread the good word about all the great and amazing arts and culture happening here in the Cleveland area through connecting with you as national panelists. You're experts. We appreciate what you bring to the table. And like I said, we learn from our panelists every single year. Thank you so much for being part of our work. To our applicants and longtime grantees or first-time folks, doesn't matter if you've been with us for 17 years or this is your first time, we are cheering you on. We want to thank you for the hours of work you put into both your application and the process leading up to it. We hope that it's been worthwhile and know that as we head into our grant making decisions and approvals later this fall, like I said, as a public entity, it's our job to cheer you on, wish you the best, and hope you succeed. And we look forward to a good year next year. And then finally, for me, it's really important that I take a moment and just thank my teammates, those of you on this call and those who are watching from the audience side. Jake, Devon, Julia, Maya, Laura, and our teammate Meg as well. You are all amazing. You're why we're here, right? We've been able to do this work over the last 6 to 9 months because of everything you're doing every day, from writing the guidelines, holding all the technical assistance workshops, meeting one-on-one with applicants, and really focusing on providing transparent, clear, and kind customer service to the groups that we serve. So thank you so much. I'm lucky to work with you. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Devon. He's going to get you started with the panel. I'll be watching from the audience side, so I'll say a quick goodbye from here, but thank you all again, and let's get going to a great day of panel.
Thank you, Jill. What a great way to get everything started. So at this point, we'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Panelists, please share your name and gender pronouns, where you're located in your professional connection to arts and culture. I will go ahead and post in our chat the order to keep us in line. And Ellen, we'll start with you.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Ellen Milligan, she, her pronouns. I'm joining today from Seattle, Washington. So excited to be here and grateful to have had the chance to read all these great applications. I'm the Vice President of Grant Making at Arts Fund.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Smith. I'm the Assistant Director at the Fine Foundation, just down the river in Pittsburgh. The Fine Foundation gives to Jewish life causes and arts and culture causes in our city and in our kind of greater Pittsburgh. Pronouns he, him, yeah, grateful to be here. Thanks.
Michael Greer, he, him. I'm also with you all from Seattle, Washington. I'm the president and CEO at Arts Fund, and just excited to be here and to have read all your applications.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Dodes. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming from Bloomington, Indiana today. I have a background as a performing artist, director, and teaching artist in theater and musical theater, and I currently work full-time as a writer at Indiana University Bloomington, where I also am an adjunct professor in arts marketing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuki Numata Resnick. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Buffalo, New York. I am Director of Arts and Culture at the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo.
Thank you, guys. So now we'll walk through how the review process will work for those who are following through the live stream. So I will introduce each applicant, organization, and project. We'll then lead the panel through a discussion focused on each of the following or the funding criteria at the time. Panelists will be invited to comment on applications in relation to the funding criteria. We'll have 3 minutes for public benefit, 2 for artistic and cultural vibrancy, and 2 for organizational capacity. Our panel co-chair, Julia, will keep us on track with time using the PowerPoint on the screen. We will have allocated 7 minutes for each application. To keep things moving smoothly, panelists should plan to come off of mute to indicate that they like to be next to speak. I might also call on panelists to speak if need be. After we go through the criteria, the panelists will submit their scores, which are tabulated by us, the staff. To our applicants, please do not contact or address the panel in any manner during the deliberations electronically or otherwise. If an applicant believes that the panelist has presented incorrect information regarding their application, they should complete the information correction form, which is available at cacgrants.org/panel. And within the audience guide, CSC staff will review the correction form to determine if it is objective correction of misinformation. If it is, the panel chair will read the correction to the panel for the public. An example of objective misinformation would be a panelist misstating the number of performances detailed in an application. This is an opportunity to clarify what was submitted with the application, but not to provide additional information. After the panel is complete, audience members are encouraged to participate in the public comment section by submitting comments via our online form at cacgrants.org/panel. The deadline to submit comments is at the conclusion of the project support panel deliberation, the end of the day today. So with all that, let's get started with our first review. Our first application is from American Hungarian Friends of Scouting for their project titled 69th Annual Hungarian Festival, sponsored by American Hungarian Friends of Scouting. A celebration of Hungarian culture shared with the greater Cleveland community. 2 live bands play, a traditional folk band from New Jersey, and Harmonia, local to Cleveland. Local and visiting folk dancers will perform traditional folk dances every hour, and instructors lead audience in learning key dance steps. A cultural history exhibit greets visitors with teachers to discuss and answers questions. Emphasis is placed on Hungarian folk arts and craft activities for children and adolescents. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
This is Michael Greer. I'll go ahead and kick us off. I gave this application a fair score. I thought the project had a very specific target and is available for all. It'd be good to know a little bit more about the exact steps to include non-Hungarian visitors, but it was clear that efforts have been taken in order to do so.
Yeah, Michael, I thought that they showed some pretty good evidence, in my opinion, just about reaching out to their neighbors by moving up the time of the festival. They were responsive to dietary needs, which I thought was a nice little touch there that isn't always the case. And then willingness to engage a larger public. But I agree that there wasn't a lot of tangible evidence about the like the name of the actual organizations that they reached out to, right? Or they didn't necessarily. I thought it would be a really nice touch if they invited like a local community member to serve on a panel, but I'm aligned with you. I had them. I thought that they had really good evidence here, but I think that some of it was lacking detail.
This is Ellen. I agree with what both Mike and Michael have said so far. One thing that I would add that I thought was a strength in this area was their intentionality in pairing experienced volunteers with newer volunteers. I thought that was a great way to bring in new folks into the fold.
And to add on to Ellen's comment about volunteers, I believe there was volunteers are going to be receiving training to be particularly welcoming to non-Hungarians, which I thought was a real plus in this area.
I think I'll jump into pretty much co-sign everything that's been said so far. I did appreciate also that the inclusion of volunteers in a way that would make them feel more trained and more able to engage with what was going on. I think also, yeah, I would like a little bit more specific detail in terms of what those partnerships looked like and how, other than in the distributing of flyers and some marketing towards organizations, that they were being included in the process.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I really noted the strong evidence of evolving their programming based on participant feedback. A few things that were called out were, changes to the food selection, extending dinner hours, making sure the event was ending early enough to be respectful of neighbors. And so because of that, I did provide a strong score for artistic and cultural vibrancy.
This is Ellen. I can jump in. I also gave a strong score in this section. I saw that they were bringing in artists from outside the area, as well as providing employment for local artists and, providing a diversity of different disciplines, dance, music, food, different types of cultural richness. They also flagged a sort of creative and welcoming idea of pairing a Hungarian folk tradition with a tradition from another part of the world. They called out the idea of a Hungarian and Punjabi carving and needlework exhibit, which I think was maybe aspirational programming, but seemed like a neat idea to, be more inclusive and add vibrancy to this programming.
This is Michael Greer. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I thought that the culturally specific programming was really at the heart of the program, and there's additional notation that in the applications that there's been intentional efforts around cross-cultural artistic programming, which Ellen just mentioned. Whether it's aspirational or not, I thought it was great to have in the application, in addition to the Hungarian-centric events. So I also scored it fair.
I appreciate previous panelists' comments for highlighting those things. I did want to point out that I did feel a little bit in this section that I gave it more of a fair score because you had to kind of read through more of the application than the specific questions to find some of the information, which could have been just more helpful to kind of coalesce into the question on the artistic and cultural vibrancy. So it did feel a little bit like there was some legwork on our end to make sure that we found all that information. I would also like to note there was one of the links in the supplemental materials that was broken. So I was able to view most of what was provided. There was one specific link that did not work. I think it was link 3.
I had the same comment, Charles, so you stole it from me. But I said the cultural vibrancy, I think, came through in the whole application. But I did, when I was going back to look at specific evidence, I was kind of, you're left wanting a little bit just by that one section. But I think the rest of it does come through.
Okay, and that's our time for artistic and cultural vibrancy. The final criterion to discuss is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I can jump in just to I wanted to pose this question early too. So I thought that this was maybe the weakest part of the whole application. Overall, I thought was impressive, but there was some conditional language about, feedback and satisfaction. I don't know if it said would or could be included, but there wasn't much detail there. And then this is a question for the other panelists too. Was I reading this wrong, or did the project expenses and the revenue not align? I think that there was like an unaccounted for something like $20,000, which unless I'm wrong, that was the majority of my criticism in this area, because I thought that might be an oversight there not to have an accurate budget.
So one of the things about organizational capacity is that regarding the budgets or numbers and the applications, if the applicants do get through and approved for funding, they'll actually work with the grant managers on fixing all of those details. But also to highlight with organizational capacity, if there's any other points regarding if you feel the staff was adequate to complete the project, them demonstrating belonging, and articulating good timelines or projections outside of just the budget. But other panelists, please speak to that.
This is Ellen. I can just jump off of Mike's comment a little bit. I did notice one thing that I think perhaps also speaks to organizational capacity. There was a comment to the budget where whoever was filling it out said that they didn't understand why there was a discrepancy in net assets, which I do think is perhaps of concern. And maybe this organization needs to build up financial awareness a little bit, although it's great to know that there are resources at CAC to help with budgeting. But that also jumped out at me.
On my end, I gave this a kind of fair, right on the edge of strong score. And the reason being, I felt that the language really implied a serious and organized way of running the event with experience, many, many years of experience, volunteers who had been involved for at least 5 years. I also appreciated the youth leadership focus. This was one place where I, similarly to Cheryl's comment earlier, I felt that I had to look in other earlier answers to kind of find some of the details on the organizational capacity, specifically that comment about volunteers.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. I did feel somewhat in this section that the scoring or evaluation criteria was a little bit vague in terms of we're looking at subjective observations of enthusiastic involvement as opposed to having a real identified SMART goal, whether number of participants and really doing that in-depth feedback and touch base. So I gave this one a fair score in terms of just feeling like I didn't quite understand the solid data we were looking for success versus not success.
Yeah, and this is Michael Greer. I gave this on the high end of weak because I thought that the engagement metrics are important and it would be beneficial to know the long-term outcomes and any measurements around long-term outcomes that are being addressed by the increased participation and the metrics that are being stated in the application.
Thank you, everyone. So that is our time for American Hungarian Friends of Scouting. Panelists, please submit your scores and we'll turn next to Baldwin Wallace University in just a moment. So our next application is for Baldwin Wallace University for their project titled BW Summer Arts Programs. The BW Summer Arts Program offers weekly in-person day classes and camps for students in grades 4 through 12 during June and July. Participants can choose from dance, music, theater, and visual arts, guided by expert faculty and guest artists. Throughout the summer, students and faculty present free concerts and performances open to the public. Would anyone like to get us started about how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community and through its project?
I can kick us off just to kind of pose a question. I thought they did a fair job of providing evidence. I mean, they go out of their way to say that the CAS believes it's essential to kind of collaborate with partners, and I get that. I think that was repeated a couple of times, but I don't see a lot of that manifest in the actual application. So I think the work itself is great. I think that there is a solid public benefit here, but I don't see where that partnership comes out to me in the application. I guess there's a little of it in the kind of like optional section, but I didn't I didn't see it.
Mike, I felt similarly to you here. There seemed to be intentionality and wanting to really reach historically marginalized communities, but also not tangible data that really could show the impact of those efforts. I also mentioned that it was great to see that this program, it seems to be open to young musicians of all skill levels, that, the program's trying to mitigate the cost, with some financial aid. And it was really good to see inclusion of music ed students as part of the staffing model. So I ended up giving this particular public benefit a fair score.
This is Michael Greer. I also gave this a fair score. I actually thought that the identification of camp faculty in an attempt to match it to the students being served was a great call out, and along with accessibility and inclusion, I thought that it was well written in terms of their intentionality. But I do agree with the other panelists that some more specific, similar to how they called out camp faculty, would be great to see.
This is Ellen. I agree with what's been said so far. I did see a couple pieces of evidence for the strength of this group's public benefit that I'll just call out. I believe they mentioned in one part of their application that 37% of students identified as African American or Black and 24% identified as LGBTQ+. So I think there is strong alignment with, as Yuki mentioned, trying to, center folks that are historically most marginalized. Also, another accommodation that I thought was really useful that they offered was residential and commuter options, so that students, could participate from all different parts of the region. And again, as someone else mentioned, I thought it was really neat that they hire pre-service music education students and provide that pipeline to bring more people into the field.
The time that we have for public benefit. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
This is Michael Greer. I can kick this off. I gave this a fair score. I thought the narrative did indicate that instructors are diverse and sourced from local communities, but it would be good to understand a little bit more details on the cost structure to understand the difference between administrative and arts and cultural professionals.
That's a really good point, Michael. I appreciate you calling that out. I had given this one a strong score based on sort of how they're setting up and the resources that they're describing to support the program. But I think it would be helpful to have some more of that details and delineation of where that money is going and how that tuition assistance works for students in the area. And I'll add this for both artistic and cultural vibrancy and sort of public benefit. As someone not from the area, it would be helpful to see what the population numbers look like compared to their percentage of marginalized students, just to get a sense of who they're serving and who the larger community is and what that looks like.
I also provided a fair score for this section. I found that I needed a little bit more context to some of the details that were. For example, it was called out that counselors were being increasing pay by $150 over the last 2 years, but it was hard to know from what and how far along, are you meeting your goal then of equitable pay structure by that increase, or do you still have some ways to go? And similarly with the faculty diversity, it was great to have that data, but also wanting to understand how that compared to where the organization was and where they want to be.
Okay, that is all the time that we have for artistic and cultural vibrancy. The final criterion to discuss is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I thought that the team and the the measures of success do a pretty it's pretty strong evidence in my opinion that they've thought intentionally about this program. I think that they've done a nice job of kind of demonstrating belonging through the folks that are involved. I will try to decouple myself as like the budget, warden or something, but there is a category that says other that's doing a lot of work because it's like $124,000, and that's an eye-popping number just in my opinion, but that might just be me.
That's a logistical question to clarify. Is how many were they limited on number of categories they could submit under that budget?
Yeah, so the expense sheet in the application does have a set amount of fields where you can enter information. But we also have a field where you can explain more about the intentionality with the use of CAC funds afterwards.
This is Ellen. I'll just say, similar to Mike, I thought that this organization demonstrated really great surveying and good goal setting. And the fact that they look at students' advancement in their artistic discipline, as well as increased confidence and teamwork, I think really demonstrates a commitment to belonging as an organizational value.
All right, so that concludes our time for Baldwin Wallace University. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to CityMusic Cleveland in just a moment. So our next application is from CityMusic Cleveland for their project titled City Music Chamber Orchestra Concert Series. In 2025, CityMusic Cleveland will present 4 chamber orchestra programs, each with multiple performances in different Cuyahoga County neighborhoods. These concerts are free of charge and are located in underserved communities within our county. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
Sure, this is Michael Greer. I gave them a fair score on public benefit. I thought the venues were in alignment with the stated mission, and it would be nice to know a little bit more about how those venues were chosen, and it would also be beneficial to hear a little bit more about what collaborations with the community means and how that is being executed in terms of marketing for the programming.
I thought the organization's mission kind of is, kind of inhabits the public benefit idea just in itself. And so I think that maybe weighed into me, kind of borderline thinking that this is a strong or fair example here. But I also appreciated some of the data of, that they provided in this, in the definition of the community, like who's involved and people's awareness of or appreciation of classical music. I thought was shows that they've at least done some thinking behind this.
I gave this one a stronger score. And I think, Mike, I'm sort of where you were, is that I think they really did show through their mission and what they're doing, sort of how that it really does come down the public benefit side. I did have a similar question to Michael in terms of venue accessibility and choice, noting that all of the venues mentioned in the project are churches, and that could raise an accessibility concern in terms of, mental, emotional barriers for certain groups that may not feel welcome in those spaces. Since the organization is not specifically aligned with religious organizations to begin with. So that was, I still rated them strong, but was wondering where that choice came from and if there were connections or potential connections with community centers or alternate venues.
Okay. Next, we can go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I can start us off on this one. I gave this section a strong score since their programming does feature diverse and under-programmed composers as well as diverse artists and conductors. They had a statistic that more than 60% of conductors and soloists are BIPOC or female. And another aspect of this section that I thought was strong is the fact that the majority of their expenses are dedicated to paying artists.
I provided actually a fair score on this one, and the reason being, I felt that the organization was soliciting direct feedback from artists, the music community, and the media community. However, I felt like it was less strong on really understanding from the community members and neighborhood leaders whether or not the programming was really reflecting the neighborhood and who the organization was trying to reach out to. So I felt there was an opportunity to really evolve that evaluation process, because it seemed to me that it was reading that the priority was really, how do the musicians feel about this? How does the media feel about the work we're doing?
This is Michael Greer. I'll just be quick and say that what jumped out to me here, I gave this on the high end of fair because I thought the artist fees were adequate and then some, which is great to see that artists are being they're being prioritized in the budget.
The final criterion to discuss is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I thought that they seem very capable of doing these projects. I rank them, let's see, borderline between, fair and strong as far as, what their capacity is here. Actually, on the strong side, now that I'm looking at it again, I think that, the venues, I do appreciate, calling out, why these particular venues. I do think that that's an important question that I definitely overlooked too. On the other hand, I do appreciate on the venue side that they know the demographics of who's going to be in those places too. And I think that the actual the team themselves is diverse and intentionally I don't know, reflecting the community in that way, which I thought was great.
I'd also, sorry, Michael.
Please go ahead, Cheryl.
I think I'd also like to point out, I ranked them on the strong side, but in looking at how we're measuring success, just a little bit more detail on how we're getting feedback from community members, like how that's being solicited and if that's uniform, would be helpful in terms of measuring that objective success.
Ditto. Thanks, Cheryl. Glad you went first.
I'll just add, I think that sort of through line throughout a lot of these sections was a question about how community members are engaged, but yeah, in that data collection and also just in decision making, which was a question I had in this section. So I rated on the borderline between fair and strong.
All right, that concludes our time for CityMusic Cleveland. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Cleveland School of the Arts Board of Trustees in just a moment. So our next application is for Cleveland School of the Arts Board of Trustees for their project title, Festival of New Works 2025. The annual Festival of New Works is a multi-arts performance event produced by Cleveland School of the Arts students. Throughout the school year, CSA students will develop original dance, theater, music, visual art, and creative writing works in a process that culminates in a series of vibrant showcases, performances, and exhibits of dozens of original student works. shared with hundreds of Cleveland families and students and thousands of local residents. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I can kick this one off. I gave this one a strong score for public benefit. They really did detail just their audience, their families, how they're going out into the community and making things accessible with the work their students are creating. So I appreciated a lot of that attention to detail in terms of even down to the ticket options and field trips that they're running through the program. So it did really speak to me in terms of trying to involve more people than just the students and the students' families immediately in the community.
I had them, maybe I missed a little bit of the detail, but I didn't think that, you know, they allude to a lot of these groups partnering or a lot of like the students. I'm sorry, I'm really like reading off screen here. You know, an estimated 500 plus students from other Cleveland Metropolitan School District schools will experience, but there wasn't a description of like how those students are reached or, you know, or a plan for that. It just kind of said we're doing it, which is great. I guess we can take them at their word, but I was a little it left me wanting more detail there. And then I thought, I'm not a math guy, but I think the number of like students and the audience members didn't really align in some areas, which made me think that they didn't have necessarily as great of a sense of who was coming and how many people and the data behind that.
Mike, I think I felt similarly to you because it seemed to me that you would benefit the most if you were in direct proximity to a child who was enrolled in the program, but less if you were sort of part of the greater public. And maybe that's where I was also reacting to, okay, maybe reaching 500 kids beyond, but how, and kind of wanting some more details there.
This is Michael Greer. I rank this on the high side of fair. I thought that the program itself was pretty inclusive of the community, given that the students were the ones that were generating the work, and a lot of the work was focused around the students and their immediate populations, which I just assumed was a reflection of the public. But I could definitely see, Mike, Yuki, how you're talking about how far does it expand outside of that group?
This is Ellen. I also rated this group strong. I thought that they had a well-defined community, actually, that they were really focused on serving those students specifically. Another thing that I thought was strong about this application is that they actually have a physically accessible building, an ADA building.
All right, that is our time for public benefit. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
Happy to get us going on this one. I rated this strong. The curriculum and program seemed really intentional in shaping creative voice. Also highlighted that there were some really exciting partnerships with like really well-known artistic entities like CIM and the Cleveland Orchestra. I did mention that I would have loved to see a little bit more opportunity for participant feedback and how that would influence future programming.
This is Michael Greer. I rank this on the high side of fair again. I thought the artistic and cultural professionals are the majority of the expense category, which is great, and that the youth themselves were the creators, which I really enjoyed about the application. I thought both of them aligned with paying artists fairly and aligning instructors with with the participants in a way that was beneficial for the students and for the population.
Just a note too for I kind of agree with Michael too. I had the same kind of mentality and grading on this area. I thought that it might be helpful. You know, there's one part that said that there was a list of of local institutions that they were partnering with that were quote unquote diverse sectors and backgrounds. And I'm relatively near Cleveland, but I don't necessarily see the diversity of sectors from this list. So I mean, just keeping in mind like the audience of the panelists reading it, I don't know if that comes through just by citing their names. That's a very small point, but I figured I'd call it out.
Right, so the final criterion to discuss is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I can go. I thought it was really clear that there's a really broad group of stakeholders involved in decision-making and execution and so much partnership. They talked about the head of school, the arts dean, the faculties, the artist in residence. And so I rated this group strong.
I also rated this group strong. They do give a really good description of their infrastructure and how they can pretty much carry this off and how it's designed to. I also did appreciate, although might have liked a little more detail in their response to what would happen if they did not get funding. And that they really talked about the talking about being resourceful and creative and working and leveraging partnerships to make up the difference rather than reducing the experience. And so they're really looking at that. While I would like some more details, it's clear that they're looking to make sure that the event can still happen the same way by leveraging that infrastructure. So I did appreciate that.
I thought having the measurables in that question number 12 were nice. I also had that on the strong side, just the number of original artworks, the participation, how they're engaging with the community. I thought it was well done.
Michael Greer, I agree as well. I rated them on the very high side of fair. Just for the record, a lot of my scores were between the low and high side of fair, unless someone really jumped out. But yeah, I thought the organization had clearly articulated goals and a timeline, and that the budgets and financials showed strong relative financial health.
All right, so that concludes our time for Cleveland School of the Arts Board of Trustees. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Convergence-continuum in just a moment. So our next application is from Convergence-continuum for their project titled 2025 Season Challenging Situations. A season of plays inspecting challenging situations and challenging the status quo. This will include plays about women's rights, abortion, the pandemic, the ecological world around us, and LGBTQ plus themes. These professional productions will be presented in their artistic home and challenge the traditional theater experience by utilizing environmental design within their black box theater. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to public benefit, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I was left wanting a little bit with there's a lot of sentiment and description about inclusivity and diversity. I think that's cited kind of throughout, but there weren't many details about how the outreach happens to some of these marginalized groups, and I kept waiting for that to kind of hit me, and it didn't, unfortunately. So I kind of had this on either the low side of fair or maybe even like some relatively weak, but I'm also happy to be disabused of that opinion.
Mike, I was in the same place as you. Actually, I felt a general ethos and sentiment of kind of inclusivity but was looking for those kinds of details. I made a note specifically about kind of how is the public being made to feel welcome? How are they being reached out to? And this could be something where it's like so obvious in the mission of the organization or the name of the organization that you almost just, maybe some assumptions were made that the panelists would just know. So I was also looking for that detail.
This is Michael Greer. I actually rated this on the very high side of fair because I thought that, and maybe I did read into the mission of the organization. And for example, in the they mentioned in the 21 seasons, 40% of the productions have addressed LGBTQ plus communities. And without getting into any specifics about specific communities, to me, it looked like the mission and the programming were aligned to address a segment of the population that that they were trying to hit. So to me, that looked like they were aware of their public benefit in their programming, and were not trying to do everything for everybody, but trying to be as accessible as possible to the communities that they were trying to serve.
I agree. This section read to me as rather strong, although this is a great point about questions about how other folks and community members are brought into decision making. But it seemed like this group was really clear on their community of adventurous theater going community and potential theater goers with certain affinities in common. I also saw that they are kind of committed to addressing geographic and social gaps through student and senior ticket prices. On the note, though, of some kind of outstanding questions, there was at some point in this section, they alluded to programming being, quote, easy access. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant. I wasn't sure if that was about physical accessibility or something else. So just maybe a piece of feedback for future to drill down a little bit on what that definition means.
Alrighty, that's all the time that we have for public benefit. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I gave a strong score in this section. I called out the intentionality in attracting diverse local talent, opportunities for new playwrights to be featured, and also funding specifically designated towards fair wages. And also kind of noted that the programming really reflects current societal issues that are being faced locally and beyond. So again, that's why I gave it a strong score.
Michael Greer, thank you, Yuki. I agree. This one I actually did give a strong score. I thought fair pay, diverse backgrounds, and intentional programming all really stood out throughout the application.
That's what I called out too.
As I think I'm in agreement with the previous panelist comments as well. I gave this one a strong score for the same reason.
Okay, we can go ahead and move on to the final criterion, organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
Michael Greer again. Additionally, I gave them a high score or a strong score on this, particularly because as a theme with many of the applications, not only did they set out the measurement of success, but they talked about how the results from those measurements would impact future programming aligned with the mission, vision, value. And I thought making that leap between collecting the numbers and future impact was important, and I'd just like to see as much of that as possible in the applications.
I also gave a strong score here. They seem to have, the appropriate staffing structure, mix of staff, but also professionals from academic institutions and contracted artists. They had a really clear timeline of how this was all going to fall into place. And I also called out that financially, the organization seems to have a really healthy balance of revenue sources, especially kind of earned income from rental and tickets.
I agree with everything that's been said. And something else that they called out is that they're an employer of primarily individuals from marginalized and underrepresented populations, which I thought was in great alignment with this section.
I think there's only one like sort of nitpicky note that I would make because I also gave this a strong score, but I did have a moment of confusion reading through the application because they used a acronym or short nickname for their organization in one question that hadn't been introduced earlier in the application. Just for consistency and to eliminate any confusion with your application, I would recommend just if you're going to use a shortened name, make sure you introduce that really early on so that we can follow.
Thank you. That concludes our time for Convergence-continuum. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Downtown Cleveland Alliance in just a moment. So our next application is from Downtown Cleveland Alliance for their project titled Public Square Summer 2025 Programming and Activation. Implement engaging programming and activations in public square with a focus on community involvement, creative and culturally relevant activities, and partnerships with local organizations. The initiatives will enhance public spaces, foster connections, and create an inclusive environment through interactive events and collaborative projects tailored to the diverse interests of residents and visitors. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
This is Michael Greer. I rated them on the low side of fair for this. I thought it was great that the program is free and accessible to the public, but as with a number of other applications, it'd be good to know more about how the programs were decided upon and exactly what level of community engagement was involved in the design of the program.
Yeah, Michael, I agree with you. I also had, there's language like they would collaborate closely with neighboring community development organizations. To my knowledge, there weren't a lot of local organizations named, and, such as, which kind of, where are those partnerships? I thought the evidence was lacking there too.
I put this one in the fair category. For kind of the same reasons, it felt like there was a lot going on. There was a lot of description how the project came to be, and what sort of the overall goals are, and some scientific data as to why. But I didn't feel like there was a lot of actual detail on what this program was supposed to be. In the narrative, including the community partnerships, what kind of artists they were hoping to bring in and activities, and even the supporting documents provided a little bit of clarity on what last year looked like, but really didn't help me get a sense of where partnerships are being developed for this year or what this project itself might actually look like for the groups involved.
I'll just add, I think that the idea of this programming is really well aligned with this section, free programming in the most visited green space in downtown Cleveland. But similarly to other panelists, I just had questions around collaboration and also how feedback might be gathered from local residents on the offerings.
Right, next, we'll go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is an organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I rated this one on the weaker side, and I think I just was really looking for more evidence of artistic and cultural events, wanting some more description of what is that kind of programming looking like. And I think there was a phrase maybe about culturally relevant activities, but again, wasn't sure exactly how well that aligned with a more sort of conventional idea of what arts and culture is. Yeah, so that's why I gave it a weaker score.
I had put this one in a fair category, kind of for the same reasons. I was looking for a little more detail. But I do want to acknowledge that the location of the event that they do describe is accessible to downtown. It's in an open space, so they are aware of, how it can be open to the community and bring people in. So that hence the fair versus weak category is that was a strong point for their favor.
Yeah, Michael Greer, I gave them a weak score on this as well, just because it was difficult to understand the split between artistic and non-artistic events. And so the rest of the budget and qualification was just difficult to parse out.
I had the same notes too, that the qualifications or how folks are being compensated and how this is kind of inclusively programmed and presented is wanting.
So we can go ahead and move forward with the organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
So I saw that their organizational capacity is fairly strong, actually, although the program is not yet planned. It seems that there is an intention to seek feedback and there's infrastructure in place. And that the project is overall well-resourced in terms of funding and staffing. So I rated this section fairly strong.
I'll say I was on the strong side of fair for this one, sort of for the same reasons. It just felt like maybe this application was written before the program is sort of fully ideated and all of those details are set. So there might be some opportunity for growth there. But they have the intention and the structure is there.
I'm in agreement with Cheryl, and Ellen also rated it on the strong side of fair. And yeah, was looking for a little bit more of in terms of evaluation in particular.
I think it's clear that they can execute this project, right? I mean, working with Project for Public Spaces is always a good idea too, I think, in my opinion. So I thought they showed a fair ability to do this.
This is Michael Greer. I'm going to be the odd one out here. I actually rated it weak, I think, along the same lines as other parts of the application where I wasn't clear on exactly what was happening. And so in terms of measurement or like program goals, I couldn't parse out how those were being measured and what the total impact was. So the capacity was definitely there, but when we're talking about how we're measuring success, I was left a little bit.
All right, that'll go ahead and conclude our time for Downtown Cleveland Alliance. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Greater Cleveland Neighborhood Centers Association in just a second. So our next application is from Greater Cleveland Neighborhood Centers Association for their project titled STEAM Makers. NCA STEAM program framework guides project-based learning for youth, adults, and older adults. Makers of all ages explore methods, tools, equipment, and materials to design and produce works reflecting their creativity, lived experience, and unique perspectives. Photography, art, nature, robotics, and virtual reality are among the myriad of possibilities engaging youth K through 12 attending Cleveland schools, their families, and older adults in creative expression in both in-person and remotely. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I gave this one a really strong score for this area. I noted there's a wide age range served from youth to older adults. The programming is mobile. It's held at known locations like community centers, apartment complexes, libraries. The timing of the classes really takes into account social isolation, and the programming itself is based on participant interests. So it really seemed like the program was so thoughtful about asking the public and identifying needs and hurdles that the public would have to overcome in order to access the programming.
I agree with Yuki. I rated this section strong, and also appreciated the sort of stated desire to bring multiple generations together and build community and inclusion, which I see as a strong public benefit.
Mike, any comments regarding public benefit for Greater Cleveland neighborhood?
No, I mean, I think that I'm aligned here too. I had them. I thought that they provided strong evidence. I thought that they had a very wide range of audiences, of publics that are being served here. I think the evidence that they provide clearly shows that they put some time into thinking about, the differences between these groups. So yeah, I rated them pretty high here.
This is Michael Greer. I break them on the high side of fair. I personally was a little confused around like the actual program narrative, but I think that was more on me. But I did think that the program was free to the public, and it was great to see that accessibility and locations was called out specifically throughout the narrative. So I thought that was a great thing, and so ranked them accordingly.
All right, next we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I ranked this as strong in their application. I think they paid really good attention to the variety of avenues of engagement that are offered through their program, and really going with individual reflection and their own volition in the projects. The thing I would have really liked to see maybe some more evidence of would be some more of that detailed feedback on maybe how they're paying their artists and how their partnerships are using some of that funding. Just to give a little bit more data point instead of they do a really good narrative. I'd like to see some more data points.
I will also say that the breadth of offerings makes it a bit challenging to understand what programming looks like. Maybe some more specific examples would have helped me get my arms around that a little bit more. But it does seem clear that the programming is very responsive to community needs and interests. So I rated this on the high side of fair.
I feel the same way. I had even just a little note that said, where was the detail on, teaching artists and educators, and how are they compensated, and how does this involve, there's a lot happening, which is good, but it's also, it makes it more difficult to kind of parse out who's doing what and where the detail is.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I rated this on the low side of fair for that exact reason, just clarification. I think there's a lot of potential in the application, but clarifying exactly where some of these arts and cultural professional funds are going, and a little bit more about the connection between the instructors and community would be helpful.
All right, we can move on to the final criterion, organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I'll say I sort of on the cusp of fair and strong here. They do a really good job explaining their team and who's involved and the variety of people. My question is, they identify SMART goals, but not they're not really, again, the detail is lacking. So they're pointed out, they're called out, but I'm not really sure what they're measuring, how they're getting that feedback. So that would just be really helpful to understand in terms of, I see that you're aware of it and that you're working to make sure that it is successful, but I'm not really quite sure what your evaluation is and looks like.
Thanks, Cheryl. This is Michael. Oh, go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say, exact same, Cheryl. I rated them on the high side of fair for the same reason.
And this is Michael. Somehow, I love how these things work. I rated it on the high side of weak for the exact same reasons. And if anyone can help me understand, I didn't see any specific goals or metrics in the measurement of success area outside of that they're there, but what they were or how they were being used, I couldn't parse out. So if anyone can help me with that, I would appreciate it.
And Michael, I called that out as well, that I was looking for like real data on what are the outcomes of this programming, and would have loved to see more of that. And perhaps this goes back to Mike's earlier comment from a few evaluations ago about financials, but there seemed to be like a big discrepancy between the total project expenses of $100,000, but then when it was broken out, the expenses I think totaled like $445,000. So I wasn't really sure what numbers we were looking at, but again, perhaps this is addressed in through CAC separately.
So that concludes our time for Greater Cleveland Neighborhood Centers Association. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Historic Gateway Neighborhood Corporation in just a moment. And I also want to mention, after we review the next organization, we will go on a short break, if that is okay with you all.
Yuki, thanks for mentioning the budget part of that, so I didn't have to. I had that as a note too.
All right, so our next application is from Historic Gateway Neighborhood Corporation for their project titled 2025 Take a Hike Enhancement. Since 2009, Take a Hike has offered free tours of unique and historic neighborhoods in Cleveland, serving over 55,000 guests. In 2025, they will reach tours with more culturally relevant information, involve the community in the development and planning of this new tour, modify some tours, and tailor the experience for students, and also create ways to make tours more accessible to diverse populations. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
This group defined their community very broadly, but they also recognize the potential to focus on people who can benefit most from this programming. I think they called out seniors and people of color as populations for whom they specifically want to remove barriers. So I thought that was in good alignment with the section, and also the fact that at least one new tour in 2025 will be developed through a community engagement process. I'm curious about what that looks like, but that seems, like a great way to increase public benefit. So I rated this organization sort of on the borderline between strong and fair.
This is Michael. I actually rated this in the weak category because I felt that it was difficult to see in the narrative how, and Ellen, I noticed, the aspirational aspect of it, but currently they're telling stories of neighborhoods, and I didn't see the neighborhood involvement and how those stories were being told, or even like whose story was being told. So I think that may have jumped out to me a little bit, is that it's in telling the narrative of a community or a story, like where's the involvement from that community? It may be there, it may be there, but I didn't gather it from the narrative.
No, Michael, I thought the same thing, and I think that saying that they will enrich tours with more culturally relevant information is great. They don't really cite how, and they also, I know that this will be organizational like management and things like this down the line. But you know, they cite that there's like 30 some odd folks that are involved, but there's not really like there's not much proof here about how they will develop more culturally relevant information, or that I don't know if I have the confidence in them to do it as the way that the application's written right now. So I had a question there.
All right, if no other comments, we can go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I rated this fair, and this is where I called out Michael's point about who's telling the stories and, you know, what stories are being told and kind of how appropriate is it, you know, so this is where that kind of stood out to me. I did, however, kind of call out that these tours really do have the potential to encourage a sense of local pride and really help to shape the perception of various Cleveland neighborhoods. So again, rated this one fair.
How you feeling over there, Ellen?
I also rated this on the high end of fair. And something that stood out to me in this section was the sort of breadth of artists that are brought into this process. They mentioned tour guides, scriptwriters, and actors that are contracted to bring characters to life. So I thought that was in alignment with paying artists.
I agree with Ellen there. I also this may have been something I should have addressed while reading their application, but the files also were very difficult to access for supporting materials here. So I ended up kind of in the fair category because it was really hard to judge what they looked like overall, who was telling the stories, how they were being presented. The other, like the tour information things worked and such, so that gave a good sense that the other materials did not work.
All right, that's all of our time for artistic and cultural vibrancy. We'll move on to organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to plan for and manage its project.
Perhaps I was dazzled again by the aspirations here, but I was impressed by the very specific and ambitious goals to expand and improve in this section. They were looking at increasing reach and accessibility, and including more immigrant and cultural perspectives in storytelling. So I thought that the goal setting and evaluation in this section leaned it towards strong for me.
I will also co-sign that again. I feel like I was in the same boat of it. It may be aspirational, but they seem to have really clearly defined goals and where they want to be. My question just would be in that process of how we get there.
Yeah, this is Michael. I guess I was in the middle, right on fair. Like the aspirations are great, but I didn't understand exactly how the stated measures of success would exactly get them to that point. But again, I think I'm a little clouded by understanding who it is that's telling the story here and who it is that like that permeates the entire application for me.
All right, if we have no further comments on Historic Gateway Neighborhood Corporation, I want to say that we can go ahead and go for a short 5-minute break. When we return, we will discuss Lay Lee as we continue the panelist discussion. So I'll see you guys in 5 minutes. It will take a few seconds to get everyone back up, and then we'll continue with Lady Lee. Wonderful. So our next application is from Lady Lee for their project titled A Moment's Oblivion. A Moment's Oblivion comprises two premiere performances of a new work for Baroque ensemble and tenor soloist by composer Viet Chuong, and a slate of community engagement activities, including conversations with artists, educational partnerships, and a free performance in a healthcare setting. The project expands and diversifies early music repertoire by centering Asian artists and a myth of Chinese origin. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I can kick it off. I thought they provided really strong evidence for their public benefit. I thought it was a really nice detail about meeting patients and caregivers where they are, was a nice touch, and I thought that there were a lot of just general concrete examples throughout, which I appreciated.
I will agree. And jumping from that, I think their overall application shows just a really good understanding of their community and what they like and appreciate, as well as that accessibility of really trying to meet people where they are with how they're implementing their programming. So I ranked this one very strong.
I agree. There's a lot to like about this application. One thing that did jump out to me as a question was there's a statement that the audience is primarily white and educated, and that the organization strives to create inclusive experiences by using an equity lens in planning. And I would have appreciated a little bit more clarity on how that's done and what that means. And also how the information about their existing audience was gathered. I think that there was a lot of great information throughout the application about how they do their work, but it was still just a little bit of a question that I had. So I actually rated this on the high end of fair.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I was kind of in the mid-range of fair as well for those same reasons. I'm looking back through the narrative right now, but it looked like a lot of the intended outreach outside of their stated community was through just discounted ticketing, which is always a bit of a red flag for me because I think that outreach goes beyond just or inaccessibility goes beyond just economics many times.
Right, we can go ahead and move forward with artistic and cultural vibrancy, the funding criterion, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I rated it strong here. My reasoning was the project is composed by a living BIPOC composer centering Asian myths and artists, and really highly unexpected for a Baroque ensemble. So there's so much opportunity here to kind of change public perception on what is Baroque music and who plays it and who is it for. I mentioned that the organization seems to actively survey its audience to determine how to continue serving and expanding its community. And I also called out that the theme of the new piece seems to include accessible entry points like healing, caregiving, accepting change, so that it can be interesting for the broader public and not simply early music aficionados.
You stated that quite beautifully. I want to just add on to that in their supplemental materials provided a really good look at community and partner feedback, giving a sense of what they collect and how they are considering that. and providing that to us to kind of give us some sense of where they stand and what they're looking at. And I think that just really supported the community conversation and how they're building their programming.
We can go ahead and move forward to discuss organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
As others have noted, it does seem like they have some good data collection, and the section also had some nice specific measurable goals. So I felt that their organizational capacity was fairly strong.
I also think the team that they have in place to manage and execute this project is impressive. And I think that, I mean, clearly they're capable of doing the work, and if they have a high they know what they're doing. They're professionals and experts in their fields.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I rated them in the fair category. And again, this is a theme that runs through all the applications for any future applicants. Tying survey results to future programmatic outcomes is important. Like knowing that we're going to survey around quantitative data and the audience experience is great, but like what exactly is it that an organization is trying to suss out? And then, and then how is that planned to be actioned on? So a little bit more, one more step further on evaluations and surveys would be great for me.
Alrighty, and that concludes our time for Lady Lee. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Little Lumpy's Center for Educational Initiatives in just a moment. So our next application is from Little Lumpy's Center for Educational Initiatives for their project titled Great Lakes African American Writers Conference. The Great Lakes African American Writers Conference, GLAAWC, pronounced glossy, celebrates the impact African American literature has on the world by creating a communal and inclusive space for mutual learning and sharing and a love for literature. This is particularly vital in a city like Cleveland, where 2/3 of the adult population reads at a third grade level. Therefore, Cleveland is in dire need of initiatives that spark an interest in reading, writing, and literature. Would someone like to get us started about how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I rated this in the strong category. I thought that the program looks to be run by and designed by a diverse community that is aligned with the target audience, and that the program is open and available to the public. So I thought this was a strong application.
I also rated this section strong. They had such a powerful problem statement that 2/3 of the adult population read at the third grade level. So I think the community is defined fairly broadly, but with a very broad ambition to spark interest in reading. And, in alignment with that, it seems like there are very broad community partnerships and admission is free. So strong public benefit.
Yeah, I mean, having being able to kind of just say that eye-popping statistic and then show how like just meaningful it is to have a project like this available for people to kind of foster that sense and love of learning and reading is did it for me. I'm aligned with you all.
I think the one, I also rated this application an applicant strong. What I would have really liked to see, just to get a better sense of what the program itself is some supporting material that links to the previous conference or agendas, or it just as someone who doesn't do conferences often, getting a sense of what that looks like and how the involvement happens for the program attendees would have been really helpful for me to really categorize it as like as solidly strong and get a real sense of that.
All right, next we can move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
Yeah, this is kind of where, Cheryl, I docked them for the same things that you just brought up, which was that there wasn't much detail here at all, really. I had this kind of, between weak and fair, just in terms of like what was missing and what I would have liked to see.
Yuki, do you have any thoughts on the artistic and cultural vibrancy for this applicant?
I think it's the same place as my control, and maybe just didn't totally understand the scope, because I think my comments are, just from the name of the organization, there seems to be a focus on African American writers, but the target audience was so broad, and also I wasn't sure that the featured writers, staff, volunteers are sharing lived experience with African Americans. So I think I needed to better understand the mission of the organization and how that intersected with the event.
This is Michael Greer. Sorry, someone's calling me right now. Looking at the criteria, I thought that they were recruiting instructors from diverse backgrounds. The one that I rated this on the high side of fair. The one thing that I would like to see is a little bit more call out in terms of administrative and event production. I know that there's not separate categories for that, but given that the literary keynotes and the administration and event event production is so high that I would love to have seen a note on exactly more of what that breakdown is. But again, I thought it was good and I rated it on the high side of fair.
All right, so the final criterion is to discuss the organizational capacity and organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I gave a fair rating in this section. They have an experienced team with a group of 15 volunteers, which I think is great. But where I saw room for growth was with their goal setting. Currently, they only cited attendance as a metric that they were looking at. And I would just really love to hear about what changes this group wants to affect in the community. I think there's so much potential there that's so aligned around what they're trying to achieve. I think, inspiring kids to enter the literary industry or inspiring a love of culture and reading. I just think that it's probably there, but it wasn't stated. So I didn't feel like I could give a stronger score here.
This was just my feeling throughout the application that I kind of felt expected to make a lot of assumptions. So maybe that's where I was struggling and wanted to see more. That being said, I did give this particular area a strong score because there was a clear timeline that was described earlier in the application. There's a dedicated team. I mentioned that there are some evaluation metrics, but also wanted to see more.
Yeah, just generally, I think but I would like to see, those measurables, those outcomes? I mean, what are we learning from it? How are we improving? And I know that those questions are out there, and I'm sure that they're thinking of them. But being able to kind of articulate them also makes you kind of put those processes into play.
All right, so that concludes our time for Little Lumpy Center for Educational Initiatives. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Local for Music Fun in just a moment. So our next application is from Local 4 Music Fund for their project titled She Scores 2025. She Scores, presented by the Local 4 Music Fund, is a groundbreaking concert series that showcases the work of female-identifying and non-binary composers challenging the classical music establishment's long-standing gender disparities. The only program of its kind in the US, She Scores not only provides a vital platform for underrepresented voices, but also demonstrates that inclusive programming enhances artistic excellence, paving the way for a more equitable future in classical music. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I really liked this application. I thought it was super easy to read. I appreciated the bullet points. Like, I kind of felt like they just hit every question and gave the answer, and I didn't have to search for it. I gave a strong score for public benefit. I called out the free childcare for musicians. Like, that's amazing. So thoughtful. The inclusive marketing strategies, the accessibility measures. I really thought this was a strong answer here.
This is Michael Greer. I agree. Ellen's going to laugh because we work together and she knows how much I love bullet points. But yeah, like you could, to your point, it was very clear, spelled out. I thought that they called out things like ASL interpretation and the childcare. It was clear to me that they were attempting to be as accessible in terms of public benefit as they possibly could, and that came through in the application.
I'll also this one also really brought through the writing for someone who doesn't know your organization or your area, and that there's enough detail that having no perception of, this organization beforehand, got an idea of what their timeline looks like, what their audience looks like, what their point looks like. And so there's really strong evidence for me to say, yeah, public benefit's strong. The only thing here I would suggest is just making sure all the links work when you're submitting those supporting materials. There was one, again, that went to a 404 not found. There was enough supporting material, and they answered the question well enough. I wanted that link to work so badly.
I just want to validate what everyone else has said. I thought this was such a strong proposal. Whoever wrote this response to question 10, I wrote down, was excellent. And yeah, it's really clear that this group has thought deeply about who they're serving and how to remove barriers for those folks, specifically female and non-binary creatives really living their values.
All right, next we can move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy funding criterion, which is an organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I think I'm the only one who hasn't voiced what we're all thinking, which is that this was a great application. So I will agree with the group here too. I had them ranked very very highly here. I really appreciated the thought that went into each of these. I mean, they really kind of hit all the notes. Sorry for the pun, I suppose. I mean, even being able to kind of like tie in kind of pre and post show work alongside the performances and whatnot was a nice touch.
Yeah, agreed. This was the question 10 that Ellen, you've referenced earlier. And I looked at my notes and I actually just wrote no notes because it just felt like they did it all. I put fully meets all parameters, so felt really strong about this.
Which I think I echo that, but the only feedback I could give in this section to like make it just super stellar would be to offer maybe some comparisons of in that fair compensation paying professionals competitively. What does that look like? What is the average pay in the area and how much more are you? Or just some kind of more detailed breakdowns that I understand, like that you know what competitive means in that market to really put it over the top. But I also gave this one a very strong score in this section.
One more thing to call out in this section was just that they wrote, this is the only program of its kind in the US, which I think is remarkable.
All right, we can go ahead and move forward to the final criterion, which is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. It's a good application across all three areas. So I rated it strong, and again, it's clear, and I think that's a great comment for all applicants. It's very clear. It just addresses specifically. I didn't have to make, as I think Yuki mentioned, like I didn't have to make any assumptions about anything, and that was really refreshing. And it seems like if they're clear on what the success measures are and they can hit that, then it will do what it's intended to do, which is great.
I think the only thing I'd mention here in terms of like clarity is there's some detail provided in the 13 optional question that supports some of the goals in this organizational capacity section that could have been combined to just make it easier to find and see in one thing, including like the geographic diversity of composers. Like the actual metric for that is in the optional section, and I just really wanted it to be easy to find in that previous section. It's there. It would have been really helpful to put it there. I also would just suggest that I think the SMART goals are meant to be per goal. They've broken it down sort of, this goal is time bound, this goal is realistic, I think, which is great. I think they were trying to be really specific and answer the question really well. But I just caution that SMART, I think, needs to be for each individual goal, needs to have all of those elements.
I had a question about that too, Cheryl. So I'm glad that I was like, oh, this is a unique way to do this. And I went, maybe I've had it wrong this whole time, but no, that's good. Thank you.
All right, we can go ahead and conclude our time for Local for Music Fun. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to the Mandel Jewish Community Center of Cleveland in just a moment. So our next application is from Mandel Jewish Community Center of Cleveland for their project titled Mandel JCC's 19th Annual Jewish Film Fest. The Mandel Jewish Community Center will host the 19th Annual Cleveland Film Fest from September 4th through the 14th. One of the Mandel JCC signature programs, the Film Fest will present approximately 30 films, including shorts, with relevant Jewish and universal themes at local movie theaters and through virtual formats. Discussions facilitated by area experts and special invited guests will follow select films. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I thought they provided a fair amount of evidence here. I appreciate that they are saying that the audience includes a diverse cross-section of greater Cleveland residents, and that some of the film fest kind of brings in folks from all different kind of backgrounds. It would have been nice to kind of have some numbers, or I don't want to say that it's just lip service, because I'm sure that those things are true, but without any sort of kind of like backup data, it left me kind of wanting them to prove it a little bit, or to show me that those are true, or that they've thought about it a little bit more intentionally. But I thought that they did a pretty good job demonstrating overall their benefit to the public.
Mike, I felt similarly. There was something about the language of the narrative that made me want to say, well, how are you doing this? How do we know you're doing this? And so I gave it a fair score. I did highlight, though, that I appreciated the kind of focus on students and lifting up student voice. And maybe I was looking for something about, okay, well, then if you're doing that with students, how are you doing it with other segments of the public that you're trying to reach?
This is Michael Greer. I wrote in my notes that it would be that the majority of the public benefit stated was around the content of the films themselves, and how that, was part of how they were engaging with the public. And it'd be great to know more about what other steps in terms of engagement are being taken to reach out to the general public beyond just the subject matter of the films.
Similar to others, I had questions around the very broad definition of community. I appreciated it, but unless I missed it, I thought it was interesting that they didn't specify Jewish or not Jewish in their audience at all, or Jewish as a population they were specifically trying to reach. And maybe it was just, implied, or maybe that was intentionally left unstated. I do think that in terms of the programming, it's clear that they are trying to reach a very broad audience and spark dialogue on issues of prejudice and stereotyping and oppression across intersecting identities. So to appeal to a lot of folks. But similar to Michael, I was curious about how that showed up outside of the programming.
Just sort of add a final point, in agreement with what everyone else has said. I do want to point out the location delineations that they've made, that they are looking to include more than just the Jewish Community Center. There is, their theater and art institute, so that there is a clear eye toward accessibility in the community. I would like to see more of those data points and engagement.
All right, so that wraps up our time that we have for public benefit. Next, we'll move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I gave a stronger score here because I felt that the films seemed to be really carefully curated for their artistic and educational content. They're meant to be provocative and provoke robust discussion. And I did mention, though, that I think audience feedback is solicited, but I was curious if that only influences the favorite film encore screening, or if there was more data that could be gleaned from that feedback, for example, to influence future programming.
Michael Greer, I scored this actually on the high side of weak for one particular comment, and that was I couldn't understand the breakdown on the expense side that was going to artists, and that was one of the criteria. It just had personnel, and I wanted to understand better how that was broken down. So if I missed something, please let me know.
I think it's nice that they have this committee too, who's kind of like alongside staff, screening and determining these films. And Yuki, I think you're right. I was impressed that these are intentionally curated films too. It'd be nice to know what this committee is, even if that was part of the supplementary materials, right? Like a list of committee members, or how this committee is formed, and if it's really part of the public, or if it's, I don't know, a subcommittee of the board or of staff or something. That was a little confusing, but I do appreciate that there at least is some sort of committee doing some of this work.
And before we move forward, class, Artistic and Cultural Vibrancy, I do want to highlight that paying artists is not a criterion. It's a way for us to show an example. It's an example or illustration of how that um, criterion might look, but it is not a sole defining point for the artistic and cultural vibrancy. So just wanted to note that before we move forward, but that's all of our time for that section. And we will go ahead and move forward with the organizational capacity, which is the organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I'll jump in. We've talked about this in other sections, but I do appreciate the structure of this organization, you know, sort of the integration of community members into that committee that we were talking about, the way that the board is involved. That said, I looked a lot at goals when reviewing this question across applications, and I found that the goals in the surveying were just not very specific. So that did weaken this section for me.
I'm in agreement with you, Ellen. I was looking for more evaluation metrics. I also would have loved to have a deeper understanding of how the event is managed and a timeline.
Yeah, Michael Greer. I wrote, there was, would have appreciated more indication of project success measurements, and while a survey was mentioned, it didn't, to me, connect to any broader goals for community change or overall connectedness. So similar to what's being mentioned. And I put this at the low side of fair.
This is kind of like the opposite of what we thought was a nice little call out in number 17 about like what happens if it doesn't receive funding. And I would have liked some sort of more creative imagining rather than just, well, we just have to scale it back. I mean, which is fine. I mean, that's the truth, and that's fine. But it's also like, I mean, surely, you know, not every grant application gets approved. So what are the kind of like ways that that's scaled back, or like what gives and how does that work?
Okay, well, that is all of our time for the Mandel Jewish Community Center of Cleveland. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to music and art at Trinity Cathedral in just a moment. So our next application is from Music and Art at Trinity Cathedral for their project titled 2025 Brown Bag Concert Series. Music and Art at Trinity's Brown Bag Concert Series will offer approximately 17 Wednesday noontime performances in Cleveland's historic Trinity Cathedral. All performances are free, open to the public, as well as live streamed, and are easily accessible by private and public transportation. Would anyone like to get us started around how this application relates to public benefit, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I think I struggled with this application a little bit just because it seemed like the organization is really going through a reimagining stage. There's been a leadership transition. And so to me, the application spoke a lot about here are the things that we hope to do, that we want to do, but I wasn't sure that I got a real sense of what is it doing right now. And so because of that, I did me just see. I gave a weak score for this public benefit on the stronger side, but a weak score. I did highlight that they're going to provide an usher handbook to ensure a welcoming environment. So that's a great thing. Would have loved to hear more about the target audiences. How are people going to learn about the program? It sounds like the program wants to be fully inclusive, but not sure how it's going to really achieve these goals.
Yeah, Yuki, I thought that there was, I also kind of had some difficulty about um how to rank this, but also because there's a kind of like organizational reimagining, but like the project itself is this um I don't mean narrow is not like a bad word, but like this narrow, these are 17 performances in this specific location, and that's what we're doing with this, and that's what we're looking for funding for. So it was a little it's different than a lot of the other applications, right, that we've seen. But that also makes me have questions about, well, what does outreach look like? I mean, how are you actively bringing in audiences of diverse audiences and making sure that people feel welcome to attend? That's where my head went with this kind of like limited focus here.
Yeah, I agree with what both Yuki and Mike have said so far, that the who or the community felt a little bit unfocused, very inclusive, but it was hard to sort of understand who specifically they're trying to serve or how they would reach them. But I will call out, central to this program is that the programming is free. That's the purpose of the program. So that's very aligned with public benefit. The cathedral is an accessible space, and it's accessible by public transit. So those were strengths for me.
To sort of add on, Ellen, to where the strengths lie for me is that this is one of the few applications we've also seen with the commitment to live streaming. And in terms of accessibility, I know that's a difficult conversation in the arts post-COVID world. But while they may have trouble defining their community, the eye to accessibility is there, which I think that's a conversation that is, still happening a lot. So I appreciated that and that I marked them. I put them in, in a stronger position because of those call outs.
Yeah, this is Michael. I marked them fair for all those exact reasons, both the pluses and the minuses that everyone called out, but they equaled out to a fair for me.
All right, next we'll go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I scored this section fair. Artists are paid a competitive rate, but I'm not sure how artists or works are selected or how inclusion and community needs are considered in design.
Those were my exact 2 points too. It was how I mean, I called out the artist compensation. I thought that was a nice touch. I just I don't know how this works.
Okay, with that, we can go ahead and move forward with the organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I think my question here kind of goes to that transition of leadership that they've mentioned, is with the team being described as just the artistic director and the program manager with a team of volunteers. How much lift is the artistic director doing? And is that leading into some of the questions of how is some of these things happening, because the outgoing or live previous person was in charge of all those things. So a little bit of a question in terms of organizational capacity there, just in terms of, do we all know what's going on? Are we able to do this the same way we have previously?
Michael Greer scored it on the high side of weak because, again, I didn't get the connection between what was attempting to be measured and like future outcomes for mission, vision, value, and future programming.
All right, if there are no further comments, we'll go ahead and conclude our time for music and art at Trinity Cathedral. Panelists, please submit your scores. And we'll turn next to Northeast Ohio Hispanic Center for Economic Development in 1 moment. So our next application is from Northeast Ohio Hispanic Center for Economic Development for their project titled La Placida Pop-Up Market. La Placida is the annual Hispanic-themed open-air market designed to celebrate and promote the vibrant Hispanic arts and culture of the Clark-Fulton area. By creating a dynamic and festive destination, the event aims to attract new visitors, immersing them in the rich culture of the neighborhood, as well as highlight the achievements of the local Hispanic-owned small businesses, fostering economic development and cultural pride in the community. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to public benefit, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I just thought the nature of the project itself, it's free to the public, open market. So I scored this on the very high side of fair because I thought it was just by design very it has public benefit just built into it.
I also think they know their audience and they know who makes up the larger community too, which is important, and that it serves that population. I mean, there's a demonstrated need just based on who's living in the area, which I appreciate them calling out. I also graded this on the yeah, I thought that they showed strong evidence here.
I was on the strong side too, in terms of the organization and their community. The questions I have here, again, as someone who's not from the area, is when mentioning partnerships and groups that you're in community with, some of those specific call outs for more just conclusive evidence would be helpful. So I know who those partners are and who you work with. There's sort of by not mentioning them, it sort of feels an assumption that I would know. So a little more detail there would be helpful.
Yeah, I actually struggled with this application a little bit. I scored them sort of in the middle range of fair, partly because I was not quite clear on what community outcome they were hoping to achieve with this market. It sort of seemed like it was mostly focused on economic development, which I'm not totally clear on if that's aligned with public benefit. Perhaps this is just sort of a nonprofit mindset coming to this, but yeah, it wasn't as clear to me. I think perhaps maybe I was just needed to draw some of those connections myself.
Okay, so without further ado, we can go ahead and move forward with artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is an organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I gave this one a strong score. I noted that surveys are being used to improve future events. The community is engaged in the planning of the event. I also noted that the fee structure is meant to offset event costs, but also prioritizing vendor success and support. So it seemed like they were trying to really strike that appropriate balance.
I don't know how convinced I was with their evidence here that there was actually like a quality artistic project that would make the area vibrant. I think that the event itself, maybe this is like kind of, Ellen, what you were getting at too, that I think it erred on the side of economic development. And I know that these are already kind of like passed muster and are considered arts projects for the purposes of this. I'm aware of that. Having said that, though, the kind of artistic quality hasn't, I'm sure it's there. I'm sure the vendors are fantastic, but it's not, I don't think it really came through in the application for me.
Yeah, I would add that I just think some more detail here in terms of who are the vendors, who are the artists participating, what kinds of vendors are there, would be really helpful in helping us understand that difference, and just being able to categorize it more strongly for arts and artistic and cultural vibrancy over the economic piece.
Yeah, I had the same struggle that I think both Cheryl and Mike stated. Maybe the not totally understanding the definition between the entertainment on stage and the vendors. Perhaps both are being sort of seen as cultural creators and providers here. But I was focused on the artists hired for onstage entertainment, and I just wasn't clear on what the artistic and cultural elements were that were happening on stage, or how those artists and elements were determined. And I also noticed that in the budget, I think $5,000 of the $45,000 expense was earmarked for entertainers. And so if that's the only money that's going to artists, for me, that knocked this section down to fair.
Okay, that was all of our time for artistic and cultural vibrancy. We'll go ahead and move forward with organizational capacity, which is the organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
This is Michael Greer. I put this on the low side of fair. I thought that the goals were pretty well articulated, but again, just with a lot of these applications, I missed the connection between what the goals were and future community benefit. Like a lot of this was just so point in time, how many people, how many, like what the visitor count is going to look like. But like, and this may also be a function of the ambiguity in terms of, is it an economic development program? Is it an artistic program? But again, clarifying that as opposed to, like, in regards to demonstrating like future value to the community and like how that's being measured and how that's going to be attained.
I totally agree, Michael. In this section, the only specific goal I saw was the number of people attending, the number of countries represented. So I was just curious about what would success look like more broadly. What are some of the goals around inclusion and community needs and community benefit more broadly? I am sure it's there. It just was not stated in this section. So this was a fair for me.
I don't know. I was also a little concerned about the budget breakdown between the income and expenses for this project. There's a lot of questions with how the expenses are balancing out. And then they do provide some examples that most of the budget is going toward the stage. And I think that I've seen some project grants in the past that where, maybe it was just musicians for a food truck kind of event to bring people together. And if that's sort of the goal here, if it's really for the entertainment and that, it would have been helpful just for that to be clearly delineated, both in the narrative and in the budget, so that we know that's what this is for. Like, this is the cultural part specifically here.
Okay, so that concludes our time for Northeast Ohio Hispanic Center for Economic Development. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Refresh Collective in just a moment. So our next application is from Refresh Collective for the project title Fresh Force Digital Arts Workforce Development. The Fresh Force is a digital arts mastery and workforce development program for teenagers in inner city Cleveland. This intensive employment experience includes digital media education, public performances, and unique career exposure opportunities. Students will be trained in digital music composition, vocal recording, mixing and mastering, digital photography, and videography, as well as graphic design. They intentionally lift up the voices of young Black and Brown artists who lack access to music education. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is the organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I'll go. I rated this section strong. I thought they were very clear on their core community of youth from the city of Cleveland, especially Black and Brown youth and their families. They provide really holistic support for those 15 kids. and compensate those kids for their time and provide culturally relevant programming. So to me, the public benefit was very clear in this section.
I ranked this one strongly as well. I thought while it's a very distinct community that they're targeting, then the program is very distinct. It really is knowledgeable about the students and their needs and how to serve them. I'd say that this wasn't quite as bullet pointed as one of the previous ones we discussed, but I think they really did a nice job laying out sort of their timeline, how they select, and what that benefit for that community is in a way that was really easy to understand and be able to dig details out of.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer, and I'm struggling with this because I rated them at the high end of fair only because I thought that the just the number of kids that they were able to interact with, but it was a really good program, and I wouldn't ask them to change that at all because I think the fact that they can focus in on, you know, a targeted and specific and manageable number of young people is really important. So I may actually go back and review this and put it as strong because I think the public benefit is probably the ripple effect of the public benefit is larger than you know those 15 kids.
Yeah, Michael, I called that out later in a different section, but the sentiment is that it's you know the targeted aspect of it. At first, I kind of went, well, you know, I had to revise my idea of what the public is, but I think that, you know, their audience is served by this program.
All right, if there are no further comments, we'll go ahead and move forward with autistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I gave a strong score here, and my reason was because they really make the point that that youth voice is driving all of the creative programming, that it's really responsive to the interests and the needs of the youth, and that the performances are really reflecting the perspectives of the youth community, of the lived experiences of the youth. So it seemed so very much connected to its mission and the core of why it exists as an organization.
I know I've been calling out like wanting data through many grants, but in this one specifically, the supporting materials just really gave a sense of what the students are doing and how they're engaging. And so just seeing you can see their voice coming through in a way that is, they want to be there and they're participating well. And I think that speaks to what they're talking about in their narrative, which is like the student's voice is present in everything that they're doing and how they're doing the program. I thought that was well paired.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I also want to uplift in this section that they called out that CAC funds will be directed towards their most needed expense, which is teaching artist and program manager wages. So I thought that was in great alignment as well.
Yeah, I ranked this on the very high side of fair and in alignment with all the other panelists. I think it's a strong program.
I did wish I also ranked this around where Michael had this too. I thought that there might have been a little bit more of an articulation about the arts and workforce development interrelationship. I mean, I understand how it's happening. I think I might have wanted some more detail about that. But I did appreciate those supplementary materials too.
All right, next we'll move on to organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I also rated this one strong. There was a clear timeline of activities. Partnerships are being leveraged to offer really strong programming. The staff seemed very experienced. I felt there were clear goals and metrics. I wrote a note that I would love to hear more about the royalty and reproduction revenue because it sounds like a really creative income source. And, I wonder if that's something that other organizations doing maybe somewhat similar work can learn from it. I hadn't seen that before, so really thought that was positive and a good thing.
I appreciated the way that they connected the goals to the measures of success in their narrative. I think what I would have liked to see is some previous data and then maybe some goals like measures of increase or things they want to see gauge versus previous year-over-year context here. That being said, I did rank them strongly because I think they're very clear on what they want to measure and what their goals are.
Yeah, I like that they're looking at pre and post program evaluations for for individual participants. I think that, and maybe that's how developing skills in audio engineering, digital music, those type of things are happening. I wondered about how are we fostering small business skills while also doing these? I mean, I think those are admirable goals. It's difficult to measure those.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I think in relation to a lot of the other applications, I thought their budget narrative aligned with clear goals, and the measures of success had an indication that they would be tied towards future improvement of the program and future improvement of mission, vision, values. So again, I scored this on the highest side of fair.
Alrighty, so that concludes our time for Refresh Collective. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to Talespinner Children's Theater in just a moment. So our next application is from Talespinner Children's Theater for their project titled You Belong, Season Support. Talespinner is seeking support for 2 productions in their You Belong season, Gather and Ista in Her Garden, which will be designed from conception to include disabled artists and communities in the creative process toward artistically vibrant and wholly inclusive productions for our audience members and creative teams alike. Would someone like to get us started around how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I ranked those on the high side of fair here, just right. I think that they did a pretty good job of describing their particular community and why they're dedicated to serving them and the steps that they're going about. They obviously reach out to the disabled community. I mean, I think that that's very clear through the application. The idea of like that the all means all sentiment, I like. I don't know what other groups. I mean, if all is all, then let's talk about like some of these other groups too. Or if it's specifically designed for the disabled community, that's perfectly fine too. But I think that the gap is kind of explicitly saying when we say all means all, what we're doing is dedicating our work towards the disabled community to make sure that they're part of that all as well.
I ended up on the strong side of this one, and I challenge just a little bit in that they do kind of go through a little bit more of what accessibility looks like for the regular audience is it question 8, where they're describing their community, that they're talking about bringing people in who maybe don't go to the theater, and with know before you go guides, trigger warnings for sensory or content issues. I think they do that, but I really do think they drilled down sort of on the side of these 2 specific projects and maybe left a little detail about how it fits in with the rest of the season and the rest of their typical community. So I think there's a balance there. But I did feel that for these 2 specific projects that they really are getting into how to bridge accessibility wider in that theater space. Because these are, 2 groups that really are kind of not served by typical children's theater presentations. So I really liked that part of it, and I think they did a good job explaining sort of what that benefit would be and their partnerships with or with the communities themselves and groups that are more or have been serving those groups longer.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I rated this pretty strong, in the strong category, because the way that I was reading it was more along the lines of universal design, which is something we're learning more about too, is that by in that all means all statement, it's kind of what I was reading is that what are the ways that they're making their production accessible to everyone by focusing on those with perhaps the least accessibility, but that can also be applicable to absolutely anyone. Ability and disability is a spectrum, and I thought they were just approaching that with this all means all. But and in addition, I thought the list of partnerships was really strong and spoke to an intentionality around community benefit.
I think to throw in like sort of a final point, what I might ask the applicant through the process if they were awarded the grant is, how are you then looking at your marketing toward your rest of your target or your general audience to make sure it's not, well, these shows are for these groups. Everyone, if all means all, you're all welcome in this space, and it's a learning experience for you as well.
So that was all of the time that we had for public benefit. Next, we'll go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is an organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
So this was also, I scored the first section strong, and this was strong for me as well. I think what was really great about this work is that they're bringing in disabled artists from the get-go and compensating them for their work and input. So I think it leads to a really great, artistically rich product that is going to be accessible to all of their audience, as we talked about. I think they talked about an explicit goal of a barrier-free, artistically rich experience. And it's clear that that's been very thoughtfully put together.
I'm in the same boat. I agree with Ellen, also scored this strong, and with the clear emphasis on making sure that blind, low vision, hard of hearing audience members are going to have this fulfilling artistic experience, and also called out that there will be pre and post show surveys that are going to influence future programming.
Yeah, I mean the call out in what question is this, 10, I thought does a very good job of demonstrating the relevancy and engagement that they're demonstrating to their community. I have them ranked highly here.
Okay, we can go ahead and move forward to go into organizational capacity, which is an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I rated them strong again. I thought the goals were clear and tied back to the programming, and that the budget showed a healthy mix of both public and private funding, which is not a criteria, but it shows that that level of like community belonging and support was central throughout the project.
I also rated this strong. I think what stood out for me was the intentionality in bringing in experienced partners, experienced actors who are, who have worked for many years with hard of hearing, low vision community. Also that the organization itself is staffed by individuals with this special skill set. And similar to Michael, noting that they had a pretty diverse kind of revenue sources, and especially educational programming, bringing in additional dollars to help fund the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and the way that they addressed in question 17, the ways that they would kind of, if they were to receive partial funding, or if they had lower funding in other areas, I thought shows inventiveness and kind of like they're undeterred in making sure that this remains a quality program.
I also rated this strong, but I do want to throw in sort of a maybe contextualizer to that is I really wanted to see maybe the goals be a little more longer lens oriented, as it was very focused on just these two projects and getting them sort of up and running and how they land with the audience, which is super important. Totally get that. But I want to know then what they're going to do with that information. Is this going to change programming long term? Are they going to try and have programs in other ways in the organization that work with these communities continually? So I just would really like to see a more long-term lens on it.
Okay, so that concludes our time for Talespinner Children's Theater. Panelists, please submit your scores, and we'll turn next to writers in residence in just a moment. So we have arrived to our final application from writers in residence with their project title, Creative Writing Workshops for Youth in Detention. Writers in residence will, 1, teach creative writing to 400 residents who are incarcerated in the Cuyahoga County JDC. 2, publish their creative writing into chapbooks that will be showcased and distributed inside the JDC, on college campuses, and throughout the community at local businesses, for example, bookstores, coffee shops, and service agencies. And finally, 3, mentor the youth during and after their participation in the organization's creative writing workshops to reduce their recidivism rates. Would someone like to get us started on how this application relates to the public benefit criterion, which is an organization's ability to meaningfully connect with its community through its project?
I thought this was another one that had a very directed audience or public, I suppose, but I did not docket points for that. In fact, I kind of gave it some additional consideration. I think that they scored pretty highly here for me. Just, they're the only ones offering this sort of work to youth in detention facilities. So I thought that was important to call out, and I appreciated the I don't know, the fact that they're doing the work. Maybe that's just me being a softie.
Yeah, this is Michael Greer. I scored it strong in the public benefit because it is a targeted population, but there's innumerable ripple effects to the general public for the work that they're doing here. I did have one comment. It's that the instructions did state that the start and end dates should not be the entire calendar year, and that is what was listed in this application. I don't know why that matters, but I noticed it, so I just thought I mentioned it, but I didn't really dock because of it.
That's one of the points that we'll work with them with if they are approved for funding.
I'll just add, I thought this was a very strong application and the strong public benefit. Not only do they know who they're serving, they know why they're serving them. They called out the fact that Black kids are drastically overrepresented in detention centers. And so I think that, yeah, they're providing a really vital service that's engaging community members in a really meaningful way as well, bringing in undergraduate volunteers and teaching artists and supporting the families of the youth that are incarcerated. So yeah, really strong public benefit.
All right, we can go ahead and move on to artistic and cultural vibrancy, which is the organization's ability to create a relevant and engaging project.
I gave a strong score here. I mentioned that the youth are exposed to a range of writing styles through the workshops, that they're really encouraged to process their identities through the writing opportunities, and also that the teaching artists and volunteers represent the community that's being served. I think the phrase, fairly hired and compensated was being used, and maybe could have used like a tiny bit more detail there, but again, gave a strong score here.
I was also strong here. I appreciated the focus on authors who identify as BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, or Midwestern, with a preference for Ohioans. So sort of making that content relevant to the population being served. And I also noted that the instructors ask residents, what do you want to learn next each week, and incorporate that feedback so that they're evolving continuously.
I called that out too. I thought that was a nice touch, and just being able to, these are pre and post workshop surveys too, so they're really trying to get a holistic idea of like what their folks want to see.
Michael Greer, I agree with all these comments and felt the same way and scored accordingly.
I'll just throw in to cap it off. I also agree and did score this one strongly. I sort of just want to throw back into public benefit and artistic and cultural vibrancy here, that while it is a specifically targeted population, it goes back to the question of, do you know who you are and serve your population well, or do you try and serve everybody and do it not so well? And I think they're really building that case where they have a targeted population and they're doing their best to serve them as best they can in these areas.
All right, so we'll go ahead and move forward to the final criterion, which is organizational capacity, an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its project.
I just want to call out like some of the details that they provided in that optional section. The question number 13 were really good. I think that it demonstrated that they're bringing on some of the folks who have been part of the organization into their leadership positions now too on the board, which I think is important. And I mean they're living their mission with that. They also, I thought it was nice to have this kind of like social impact survey that they're alluding to here, mentioned as like what others appreciate about the organization, so they're able to kind of build from that, which I think is important.
I'll add to this one. I think I liked that they had, numbers for their goals. Like, this is the percentage we want to be at on our feedback. My only concern is that some of those numbers look awfully aspirational, just even based on the one percentage they applied at 51% the year before. They want that to be 70, and that's a lot. That's a big increase. So I'd say they're aspirational, and I'd really love to see return data on that.
Yeah, I gave a strong score here. Felt like the planning was really clearly laid out with timelines. I from the SMU data sheet, it did seem like 2023 is a bit of a rebuilding year. Attendance numbers were much lower, so definitely did not dock it for that. But I just would have loved maybe a little explanation as to why the numbers were so different, and what's kind of what the future looks like, which might speak to Cheryl's point about maybe there's some aspirational numbers there because of the lower attendance in previous years.
This is Michael Greer. I scored this on the very high side of fair. I thought that the success measures, while they were, yes, they were aspirational, but they were there, and they were called out specifically. So at least there was a target from which to judge against, which I thought was really strong comparatively. So again, great application.
Okay, so that concludes our time for writers in residence. Panelists, please submit your scores. So that was the last review of the session. Thank you for the panelists for your thoughtful comments and your participation today. I'd like to give each panelist a moment to share any general feedback around the process or the applications, and remind audience members that they can do the same via the online public comment form at cacgrants.org/panel, or you can see it in the chat.
This is Michael Greer, just acknowledging the fact that it is rough out there. And thank you all for, and this is directly to the applicants. Thank you for doing what you do. We are in an impossible situation of having to score and rank and judge and do all that. But at the end of the day, I just personally appreciate the dedication to making community better through the arts. So thank you for that. As far as constructive criticism, I'll say at any point, particularly in goal setting, if you can tie that back to like, what are you collecting and why does that matter for the future of your program? That to me is the missing link. We all know what we want to collect, but why exactly are we collecting it? And like, if you collect what you say you're going to collect, how is that going to make things better in the future? So articulating that would be great for me to see in any future applications. But again, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Michael.
This is Ellen. I would echo that. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. You know, I hope that you understand how much we appreciate what you're doing and that you're adding so much value to your communities. So thank you for doing that hard work. I would say, I think it's clear there's so much amazing work happening in Cuyahoga County. One area that I think is always helpful to focus on is accessibility and thinking about people with disabilities. I saw this called out in some applications, but I would just say it's you know, most people will have a disability at some point in their life. So just encourage everyone to keep thinking about, yeah, how to increase your accessibility in all aspects of your work.
Thank you, Ellen.
I just want to call out this. This is more maybe internal, but the application system worked really well for me as a panelist. I think that it was nice to be able to see the kind of like 3 areas and how we're supposed to grade them, and those type of things work really well. I know that my grantee's perspective and otherwise appreciate a very straightforward grant application, and it seems like that's what this one is, which I think is great. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of simplified grant applications over here at the Fine Foundation.
We appreciate that, Mike.
I'll throw in that I'm, this is Cheryl, as someone not from the area, just really exciting to see the work that's happening, and things that I definitely want to add to my list to come check out if and when I visit. So really awesome projects. And I think sort of my perspective is I was always looking for a reason to say yes, a reason to score higher, a reason to find a strength. But since you're submitting these to those of us who are not very familiar with the area, the more detail, and we saw in some of those, the bullet pointed lists, like the more detail, the more data, the more you can talk to someone as if they have no idea who you are and give them as much background, especially if there's no word count, go for it and use all that time that you have. Just to really, and even if that means having somebody else read it first to make sure that that comes across, and not assuming any internal knowledge or information, so that we can really get a sense of what you're doing and be able to find those reasons and nuggets to just score it as high as we can, or say that it's a strong application with all that detail. And the only like little tidbit I'd say is please have someone check your links and your technology to make sure that everything you upload works or loads or across platforms. And I know CAC does some work behind the scenes to help that, but just having a proofreader double check to help make sure those are there and working for everybody.
Yeah, I'd love to give props. Oh, sorry, Davon. But just want to give props to CAC for putting together such a thoughtful process. And I think, you know, being able to bring in panelists from beyond Cuyahoga County, and I am as well not super familiar with the area. It's a really incredible and organized feat that you all take on. I wanted to speak to Cheryl's point about, like really just reading all of these applications and wanting to find places to really give those high marks. And I want to call out CAC because I think that was one of the takeaways that I remember from the training of, hey, like look at these applications from a place of positivity and best intent. And it was a really nice mindset to be in. So, to all of the applicants, I hope that that's also where we were coming from. This wasn't a place of trying to be punitive in any way, but really from such a place of positivity.
I'll add to that, like knowing we were crunching for time, like only having 7 minutes to give you our feedback, and that, like, know that there are so many positive things that we probably didn't say that we felt in our hearts and knew reading through your applications. And so thank you for all that hard work and sharing it.
Thank you all for your work and comments, so thoughtful and very encouraging. Panelists, I'm going to ask you to stay in the meeting as we close the live stream shortly. Listeners, this is our final session for the 2025 Project Support Panel. Thank you all so much for joining us today.